Good evening, everyone. We are entering into the second lesson of our Bible class. We started it last week, uh, entitled Strong in Adversity. Last week we introduced the notion of adversity and the correlation with strength. First of all, we all have or are experiencing adversity. Amen. We all are dealing with something. And COVID-19 has made sure that just consider the manner in which we are worshiping. I mean, that presents a level of adversity. Well, let's go back to the first verse that we presented on last week, and that's Proverbs, the 24th chapter, and the 10th verse. And it reads, "If thou faint in the day of adversity, thy strength is made small." Now, in that faint, that word faint, now we're not talking about swooning, falling over, maybe when we become overheated. Look at the NIV translation. It says, "If you falter, waver, back up, become unreliable or untrustworthy in the times of trouble, how small is your strength?" You know, there's a saying that goes, when the going gets tough, the tough gets going. Well, what makes one tough? What makes one tough? I'll give you a hint. It's facing adversity. Trials, tribulations, hardship, disappointments actually reveal a person's strength. Strength means firmness or stamina, the ability to stand in the face of adversity, the stamina to maintain, to keep on going. Strong people stand firm when trouble strikes. Others fold or waver. Question. Now you see that I highlighted the word strikes. It almost presents itself as if trouble happens all at once. And that's the question. Does trouble present itself all at once? Or could it be gradual? Truth is of the matter is sometimes it does come out of nowhere, but the other times it's also gradual. Proverbs 24:5 says, "A wise man is strong, yea, a man of knowledge increaseth strength." Knowledge of what? Knowledge of what? Knowing God. Really, that's what we're talking about. Knowing God. Wise people fear the Lord and trust in Him. They do not lean upon their own understanding or strength. A wise man is strong. A wise man is strong. So where does this wisdom come from? It comes from God. So knowing God, knowing more of God, knowing about God increases your strength. And so when you know God, there is not a need to lean upon your own understanding or strength. You in turn lean upon the strength of the Lord. How much strength or wisdom does it take to handle unemployment? You know, we're talking about strength and adversity. So I'm presenting you some examples of what I call adversity. You know, strength is, you know, you can't go to the store and buy it, but let's consider How much strength does it take to deal with unemployment? How about financial difficulties or a broken relationship? How much strength does it take to deal with a family problem? How much strength does it take to overcome disease, whether it's your own or someone you love? How much strength does it take to deal with and work your way through the effects of an accident? Or how much strength does it take to deal with and move past the death of a loved one? Is it strife? Are all of these things, do they happen at once, or do they come gradually? And again, the answer is both. But I guess a bigger question is for you is, do you find these adversities, do you find them to be strengthening? Or if you've experienced any of them, were you weakened by their experience? Think about it in terms of going through the experience. Were you made the wiser? Does it take strength to lean not to our own understanding? We are to trust in the Lord and lean not to thine own understanding. It does take strength because our inclination is to lean towards what we know, sometimes lean towards who we know. But here's what Paul says in terms of his experience in dealing with adversity. He says in Philippians 4th chapter, the 12th and 13th verse, he says that I know both how to be abased. In other words, I know how to live and deal with lack. And I know how to abound. I know how to deal with and live with a plenty. Everywhere in all things, he says that I am instructed both to be full and to be hungry, both to abound and to suffer need. And then he makes a transition here, which is important for us to delve into and really understand. He says, I can do all things through Christ, which strengtheneth me. Paul said he's been through some stuff, and he's experienced having, and he's experienced not having. And what has he learned from it? He's learned how to survive. He's learned how to do with, and he's learned how to do without. But again, it does. He makes a difficult, sometimes to understand kind of transition, because how do you go from learning how to deal with issues and circumstances and then say, I can do all things through Christ, which strengtheneth me? See, he's saying I've learned from my past, from things that I've conquered, things I've gone through. And because of my experience of the past, I can speak to the future. I can do. He says, I know. I know. Emphatically, I know both how to be abased and I know, again, emphatic, how to abound. Everywhere in all things, I am instructed. Instructed by who? Again, who's the rabbi? Who's the master teacher? Jesus himself. Both to be full and to be hungry, both to abound and to suffer need. But again, look at that. Look at the. You got to look at that. That conclusion in terms of him saying, you know what, man, there's nothing that I can't do. I know I can. There's nothing I can't do. I can do all things through Christ, which strengtheneth me. I can do all things through Christ, which strengtheneth me. There's a formula there. Uh, there's a connection between I can do all things and then what Christ does. I can. How can you? Through Christ. And then there's the Christ who strengthens me. They go both together. They go together. Because I can't do all things. Paul said I can't do it all by myself. I got to have Christ. And what Christ is saying that I strengthen you, but that means you got to at least get started. There's a part of the task dealing with adversity that you have to deal with. So think about this, in believers. If you saw a sign that says tough times ahead, what do? How does the believer go forward when he or she knows that there are tough times ahead? And when there's a sign, that means if there were such a sign on the road, tough times ahead, you've got believers going past the sign. You have unbelievers going past the sign. And is there a difference? Is there a knowledgeable difference in your mind in terms of how an unbeliever or a believer responds to this sign? And there should be a difference. And when you see this sign, if you saw this sign, what would you do? Would you pull over? Some people most definitely would pull over and to think about what their next course of action should be. Question for you though, if you were one of those who would pull over, how much gas or strength is required if you pull over to the side of the road after seeing the trouble ahead a sign? In other words, if trouble is at your face, trouble is knocking at your door, and it says, I can do all things through Christ which strengthens me. How much strength is required if, in fact, you go in hiding, or you cover your head up, or you attempt to ignore the problem or the situation that you're facing, or that you act as if the situation does not exist? How much strength is required to continue on? Of course, the answer is none. Here's how the believer responds. The believer declares, I can. And rather than pulling over to the side of the road, and at least staying by the side of the road, he continues. He gets up and he faces the circumstances head on. And it is then that Christ steps in and strengthens the believer. For many of us, Christ is saying, hey, come back. Don't turn around, because I was going to help. Don't go into hiding. Come out of hiding. I'm right here. Trust in me. You can depend on me. Lean on me. Lean to not to your own understanding, but if you'll just acknowledge me in the way you're trying to go, I'll direct your path. I'll lead you around the trouble. Paul had an issue, and here's what Paul says in 2 Corinthians 12 and 9. And he said unto me, Paul prayed 3 times about getting his situation removed. And here's what he heard back from God. My grace is sufficient for thee, for my strength is made perfect in weakness. Most gladly, therefore, this is Paul's response now. Most gladly, therefore, because he's learned, he's been taught, he's understood, he trusts the word that the grace of God is sufficient for him, and that God's strength will be made perfect even in Paul's weakness. So Paul said, gladly, therefore, will I rather glory in my infirmities, that the power of Christ may rest upon me. My strength is made perfect. God's strength comes to bear in a time of wrath or weakness. Think about this. Put this picture in your mind. If you're lifting weights, how do you know how much you can lift? You really don't until you get at it and try it. And if you have a spotter, I don't know if you know what a spotter is, but that's someone who stands over you, and if something happens, they're there to help you put the weights back on the rack. But when do you need a spotter? You need a spotter when you are about to fall, when you need help. And remember, Paul says, I rather glory to be active. And what he's saying is, I have hope even in the face of my infirmities. And he's not talking about a pity party, because glory in his infirmity is not the same as having a pity party. Now, he's not having a party, period, but he's not falling by the wayside either, because he's strengthened internally by the knowledge that the grace of God is there and accessible to him even in his times of weakness. Have you ever done what you thought you couldn't do, or accomplished what you thought you couldn't accomplish? It was tough, it was scary, but nevertheless, it had to be done. So you took off on a journey, and even though you doubted yourself, because of your perseverance and your faith, somehow you made it. Can you just think of some circumstances and situations? Well, take a look at this one. This is a swamp. I don't know how many of you have ever been in a swamp, but think of yourself in a canoe, and darkness is soon to come, and you got to get out of this swamp. Would you navigate your way through these waters? You have to. You can't stay by the sidelines. You can't park. It's getting dark. You'd have to try. But in trying, what things would you consider? What would be going through your own mind? You probably would be thinking, I wonder if this boat will make it. I wonder how deep the water is. I wonder what's in the water. I wonder what should I take along this journey. But you got to remember, you've never done this before. And so your understanding is no good. And so most would say, hey, I'm going to pray. And that, my friend, is a very good start. This is how we go forward. Romans 12:12. Rejoicing in hope. In hope. Patient in tribulation. Continuing instant in prayer. Let's look at the NIV translation, because it says be joyful in hope. You got to look at that. In hope is consistent with both translations. Patient in affliction, and faithful in prayer. We ought to be joyful, and we're not talking about just smiling, because some folk will smile and be torn up on the inside. But the key here is this in hope. In hope. And see, while on earth, the believer will face problems, no doubt about it. Difficulties, troubles, trials, tests, tribulation, traumas, and some other T's. Ordeals, suffering, and pain. And some may ask the question, what in the world is there to be joyful about? But and really more important, the question is, what is in hope? What is in hope? The believer is to rejoice in hope. And that hope is in God's presence, God's concern, and God's care. The believer knows that God will do one of two things. He'll either remove the trial or deliver him through the trial. And knowing and having knowledge of that, then we can rejoice and be glad. This in hope is a state of being. It is a state of knowing. It is being able to say, even in the face of adversity or trials, that this is the day the Lord has made, and I will rejoice. I will be in a state, in a mindset of rejoicing, even in adversity. Why? Because I know how this is going to end. For Christians, believers, adversities turn into opportunities. Opportunities for what? And how can a hardship turn into an opportunity? Well, first of all, hardships give us opportunities to walk in our authority in Christ Jesus. If you've been given the authority of something, the only way you really exercise that authority is that you walk in it, that you live it out. Okay? A policeman has authority. He has his uniform. He has all of the other tools that's required. But if he never leaves the police station, it is not an expression of that authority. But when he's out on the street functioning, then the authority is there and is right out in front. They give us fresh opportunities to see God's authority at work. Question like, how do you know you're an overcomer? Well, you don't know you're an overcomer until you actually have overcome something. That's the opportunity to see who you are and what you are and who you belong to. Now, you don't know that you're a winner until you have won something. When a person fails, they call them a failure. When a person loses, they call them a loser. But when you have won, you are a winner. When you have overcome something, you are overcomer. And adversities give you the opportunity to really understand, express your faith, and just to show just how real God is. The other thing is, we've been given a responsibility to participate with God in ruling the kingdom. We've been given a level of authority, but we have to live up to that responsibility. But if we run and hide and leave it all up to God, then we're not really living up to that responsibility. Unfair circumstances, unfriendly accusations, and ill health. These are adversities. They provide us with a perfect opportunity to manifest the grace of God. How do we manifest the grace of God? How does what God has freely given us, his grace, his unmerited favor, how does that show in our lives? Paul says in 2 Corinthians, the 4th chapter and the 10th verse, he says, we always, talking about believers, we always carry around in our body the death of Jesus, the gospel. We always carry it around with us. And how do we do that? We do it really through grace when we accepted him as our personal Savior. Grace came along with it, so that the life of Jesus may also be revealed in our body. How is it revealed? We are supposed to show forth the glory of God in the midst of and because of our adversity. When we go forward, the strength of Christ is shown. It's evident when we go forth in the face of adversity. We do so by faith. We do so with an understanding that even in our weakness, God's strength will be made perfect. It will be made evident. We give him an opportunity to move where we didn't have the power, the know-how, the knowledge, or the understanding to move. Our grace, unmerited favor. We didn't do anything to achieve our salvation, but we absolutely must do something to actually show it. What are some situations that require a show of grace? I guess I'll give you one example and you can think through some others, but how do we respond to the ill treatment of others? When folk have done us wrong, talked to us wrong, how do we respond? Do we respond in kind? Or do we show grace? How do we respond with respect to situations of sickness or death? Do we feel like we've been treated unfairly? Do we pout? Do we go in hiding? Or do we share what we've learned and console others, even while others are trying to console us? Once you have risen to the occasion, once you have moved forward, acknowledged, allow God to strengthen you in terms of dealing with your adversity, the next step or the next requirement is perseverance, holding on to what you've gained. Ezekiel, the 3rd chapter, and the 8th and the 9th verse says, "Behold, I have made thy face strong against their faces, and thy forehead strong against their foreheads." He's not saying we need to be hard-headed, but as an adamant, a stone harder than flint have I made thy forehead. Fear them not, neither be dismayed at their looks, though they be a rebellious house. We know some folks who have some pretty stern looks, and that can stop you in your track, but that's not what we're talking about here. Isaiah, the 50th chapter and 7th verses, "For the Lord God will help me, therefore shall I not be confounded." I won't be confused. "Therefore have I set my face like a flint, and I know that I shall not be ashamed." I am going to keep forward. I'm going to be confident in my approach. It'll even show on my face. Luke, the 9th chapter and the 51st verse, "And it came to pass when the time was come that he should be received up." Jesus, he steadfastly set his face to go to Jerusalem. There was a path that had to be followed. There was a mission that had to be accomplished. He had been taught. He knew. And so he set his face, even in the face of adversity. When the sign said trouble ahead, he continued. And so what does it mean to set your face? It means to go forward in the face of adversity, even knowing that it's going to require discipline, and yes, a certain face or certain look. But it's not just about a look. It's also about having a made-up mind and knowing that all things are going to work out for your good. To set your face, it means to be absolutely to to be absolutely determined to fulfill the Father's will, not your will, but the Father's will. To be sure and unflinching in your faith, even at the prospect of torture, and being resolute, determined to the point of continually pressing forward, continually. That's not the same as taking one step forward and two steps backwards. No, continually pressing forward, even if the dangers ahead have indicated death. Should it matter what people say about you? Because as you press forward, you're going to hear some things that could shake your level of confidence. Child, I wouldn't do that if I were you. Child, are you sure about what you're doing? Should it matter if people hate and despise you? People don't want to see you get ahead. People will recommend you not go that route. And so the question is, how determined are you? What's more important? God's will, what he has in store for you, what he has put in front of you, the visions that he's allowed you to see. What's more important, God's will or keeping the peace? To be strong in adversity, here's something you got to know. You got to have a calling. And with that calling, a sure word from the Lord that you are in his perfect will. That there can be no doubt and should not be any doubt as to the Lord's word for you. You have to be fully persuaded that what God has said, he will do. There has to be a foundation. There has to be something that you trust in, something that you believe in. You have to be fully persuaded that his hand is upon you and that you are going to come out on the other side. It takes a great deal of self-awareness. There has to be an understanding of where you're headed, direction you are going. There can be no doubt in all in what you are hearing from God. You got to be sure that you're hearing from God and you're not hearing from others, hearing from family members, friends, and foes alike. Now, you're going to hear them, but be sure that their hearing doesn't interfere or get in the way of what you're actually hearing from God. Hebrews, the 10th chapter, and the 23rd verse says, "Let us hold fast the profession," what we profess, what we believe, what we act out of our faith without wavering. Why? For he is faithful that promise. And as you stand on the word of God in the face of what seems doubtful and even unlikely, because you've never gone that way before, God will surprise you. And not only will he surprise you, but he will go beyond your faith. He will bring you through victoriously. He will bring you through. Remember, God won't always get you out of adversity, but he will always bring you through it. And so on tonight, as we finish, what are you professing? In despite of adversity, what are you professing? Where is your hope? Is your hope in God? Is your hope in Christ? Is your hope in knowing that you got a comforter, that you got a protector? Is your hope in knowing that you got a provider? Is your hope in knowing that you've got a healer? And what are you professing? What is it that's coming out of your mouth? And not only is it coming out of your mouth, but what do your actions show? Are you pressing ahead, or have you pulled your car to the side of the road in despair? So again, uh, adversity requires strength, but it's not our strength, but it is the strength of God. And his strength is made perfect even in our times of weakness. Amen. Next week we will continue, and the subject will be learning to love adversity.